Hi, this is Nick Lalonde, your host of What's Next, making your third act your best act. Today you're going to hear from Cynthia Sabatini. Cynthia is a successful consultant advising some of the best names in healthcare. She made the decision in 2010 to take her expertise and explore consulting, a transition that's been both fun and fruitful. What stuck out to me in my conversation with Cynthia is that at 64, she loves her work and she doesn't feel like she'd be able to quit cold turkey despite the fact that she's reached financial independence. Be sure to listen in when Cynthia is asked how she will know she is ready for retirement. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Cynthia as much as I did. Cynthia, thank you so much for coming on to What's Next, making your third act your best act. Really excited to have you on the show. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is a lot of the folks that I speak with are searching for this 1099 consultant-based line of work. And you actually work as a consultant to the pharmaceutical industry today. Can you share with us and the listeners just a little bit about what you do as a career now?
Certainly. I have actually been a consultant for the last 20 years, but it's real, or maybe even more, but for the last 13 years, I've been a 1099 or a freelance consultant on my own. And prior to that, I worked for consulting firms. And the type of consulting I've essentially done since 2010 has been the type of consulting that I outlined for you. My clients are pharmaceutical companies. Now, my clients for the last 20 plus years, even when I was an employee of different consulting firms, were always pharmaceutical clients. That's the industry I've spent my time in, or most of my time in. And as a 1099 consultant for the most part for the last 13 years, I've done this type of promotional review work, working as a medical/consultant, reviewing all the promotional materials, whether they be drug ads, websites, material salespeople use, material marketing people use, even material that their scientific people use that face the public. And the public primarily are healthcare providers and also consumers. And as I mentioned earlier, I work with a regulatory and a legal reviewer to make sure that the entire package of promotional review is looked at from those three disciplines and is in sync with the Food and Drug Administration's guidelines.
So my wife and I, we watch Hulu, and we're watching this season right now of Fargo, and we don't pay for the ads on Hulu, we don't pay to not have the ads, so we have to watch ads and commercials. So we see about 3 drug commercials every 5 to 10 minutes into our episode, and so I'm thinking we've probably seen some of your work on TV at this point.
You may or you may not have, because the area I work in is the rare disease area.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And the 2 areas I work in, but the largest area is a rare disease called neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. And we have really not run many drug ads for that recently. Another area I work in is generalized myasthenia gravis. And there are currently some drug ads running for that disease state. But that's also, it's not as rare as the first one I mentioned, but it's not as common certainly as diabetes or high blood pressure or even some of these autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis.
Now, when you think about retirement, what thoughts or feelings come to mind?
Yeah, I look forward to it, but as I mentioned, I'm ambivalent. I'm not completely sure that this is the exact right time to do it for a number of reasons. One being, I very much like my job, my consulting. The other being, I don't want to have too much time on my hands to ruminate. I do have hobbies, and one of my biggest hobbies is gardening, but living in the mid-Atlantic, this season is not a gardening season, so that takes, the winter out of the mix. I and I'm not gonna address politics, but I am involved with 2 taxpayer advocacy organizations, but they're part-time endeavors, so I don't think they would provide me with enough, um, of a distraction, so to speak, at least not the way they're orchestrated now. I do belong to a book club, but, that's limited in duration. So, my concern is even with all these outside pursuits, am I still going to have too much time on my hands? Or if not too much time, will there be hours that I'm not working that I'll ruminate about, personal matters, some of which I have control over and some which I don't?
You have a broad range of hobbies, more so than some of the high
Yes.
achievers that I talk to. So gardening, politics. The one that made me laugh internally a little bit was the book club. And I read this article the other day where it was talking about a book club. I think it was out in California, and they finished their first book after like 25 years. So I'm not sure if it's one of those book clubs, but that's the kind of book
No,
club that I want to be
no.
a part of is the one that comes, brings everyone together and has fun and forgets that there's even a book that they're working on. But I'm curious, I want to go back to a comment that you made. You said, Nick, I don't know that now is the right time. And it
Yeah,
sounds like what you're worried about is will you have enough distractions, right? Maybe
yeah.
with your time? Um, and then the other thing I heard is it sounds like you just really enjoy what you're doing. Can you dive a little bit deeper into the distraction piece and maybe what you really do like about work?
Well, what I really do like about work is the consultative nature. I work with large teams and I'm in meetings where I have to give them feedback on the promotional materials that they're responsible for. And in large part, it's the marketing folks, but it can also be medical slash scientific folks. And as the medical reviewer, I have the most input into these pieces. Legal probably has the least. Regulatory also has a sufficient amount of input to provide. But if you ever sit in on our meetings, uh, I, as the medical reviewer, am really speaking the most and providing the most input.
Mhm.
And what I like about it is some medical reviewers will say, well, this is not acceptable and you have to change it and leave it up to the client and the client's advertising agency to change wording. I like to provide suggestions to the client so that they know the terminology and the wording that would be in sync with the Food and Drug Administration's guidelines. And what it boils down to is if they don't like my input, then there's a negotiation. And we
Mm,
negotiate all the time about words, not about money in this
yeah.
consulting, but about words.
So I think you mentioned in our prior conversation that you're 64 today. Has age played a factor at all in how you think about retirement? Statistically, right? I mean, when Social Security was first created, full retirement age was 65, and I just find a lot of people think about retirement in their 60s. So has that impacted the way you think or feel about retirement?
Well, it has in the sense that since I can retire financially, maybe I should and enjoy it. With respect to the Social Security piece of it, uh, my plan, because I like to maximize my return on investment, is to wait until I'm 70 to draw down upon it.
Mhm.
So, even though financially I can do it and this has been validated, there's a part of me that still likes accumulating wealth. And there's a part of me that is concerned about changing from an accumulator of wealth to a spender of wealth, purely a spender of wealth.
What scares you about that?
Well, it's a whole new role for me. That's number one. And like, and I probably view worst case scenarios. I have assets to carry me through. It's been validated, verified. Monte Carlo simulations have demonstrated that. But
You mean to tell me that's not a casino?
uh, I do understand what's explained to me with respect to my portfolio. So I know it's not a casino. Um, However, I guess with respect to finances, I view worst case scenarios. And that is a bit scary, especially since, as I mentioned, I've always been an accumulator of wealth. So I've been able to depend on that role. And switching now to being someone who would start spending down her assets is brand new. And hey, there's always fear of the unknown.
When did you know that enough was enough for you, though? At what point did you reach financial independence? I'm just so curious. What kind of planning went into that to figure out, hey, I could step away from work today if I wanted to? It sounds like with how you approach work today, you're working because you want to, not really because you need to. Is that right?
Correct. Correct. It's been a few years now that I knew I could retire. But, you know, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I certainly did not have the mindset to retire at all. I felt at that point, hey, this is gravy at this point. So let's ride the gravy train until I've had enough. It's within the last year and a half that I've started to think about it. And what also kept me um, not retiring is that I wasn't of Medicare age. And I would say, hey, well, maybe when I become of Medicare age and can sign up for that type of health insurance, that might be the more appropriate time. I've always had health insurance through consortiums. And I thought, well, I'll just, and at pretty good rates. And I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I just wait until I'm Medicare age. So that comes into play too.
how will you know when it's time to retire? And what I mean by that is you're 64 today. You said, Nick, now's not the time. I have Medicare coming up at 65. You mentioned 70 in delaying Social Security. Is it going to be some life event? If you're already financially independent, I'm just curious, how will you know when you're there, when you're ready to step away from what you're doing?
Well, there have been a couple life events that have made me think about doing it. Um, I think right now, what will cause me to step away is once I've had my fill of doing what I'm doing. Once I no longer like it, once I find that, hey, this has become boring. Um, you know, there are just too many demands on my time for something that I no longer like as much as I once did. I think that will be the start of the ringing of the death knell on continuing to work.
Yeah, it's so interesting when I talk to high achievers. So many of them say, Nick, I want to get into consulting because I'll be able to control my time and how many hours a week I'm putting into that. So it sounds like you'll work. It could be beyond 70 as long as you're enjoying it. I mean, is there a world where you're 75 and still consulting and doing what you're doing today?
I don't think so. I
so
don't think
so
so.
so maybe
No.
so maybe you would age out of that at some point. And
Yes.
why is that? Is it because you have so many other hobbies like the gardening and the politics and the book club that you want to pursue with your time?
Yeah. And I also think too of going back to school in a discipline that I'm interested in. And I'm particularly interested in economics. Not that I would go back for a degree, but I'd like to take courses.
I was an economics major back in college. It's fascinating. You and I could nerd out on economics.
Yeah. I'm
I'm right there
particular
with you.
and coming from a healthcare background, I would be particularly interested in healthcare economics. The whole pricing in the United States of treatments, therapies versus European models. So I won't go off on a tangent, but that's what would
Yeah.
interest me.
I think that's so cool because most people only go to school, because of what it can do for their career. It sounds like you would actually go to school because you love learning. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Do you think there's a link between mental stimulation and longevity in human
I com-
beings?
I completely think there's a link between. I know they've done studies, and I'm familiar with one study that they've done on nuns living in convents and in congregations, whereby they've looked at their longevity and they've looked at the mental stimulation that they get, many of them who historically have taught. And they also look at their rates of dementia, and they have found longer lifespans and reduced rates of dementia. And there are other scholarly articles and studies that I've read that have convinced me that yes, there is a link between longevity and mental stimulation.
I think that's so true. I've talked to so many high achievers, and it seems like not only is there a link with longevity, I don't even think that's why a lot of high achievers pursue learning or that mental stimulation. I just think they need it in their day. And it's
Yes,
I want to go back to this is a term that was created in 1959 called the golden years. Do you know what I mean when I say the golden years?
yes. The retirement years, that's my understanding.
Yeah, it's the retirement years. So everyone has some sort of knowledge about the golden years, right? And what I find so intriguing about that is it was this endless vacation that was promoted. It was actually a retirement community that was created in Arizona, and they came up with this marketing term, and it's stuck since then. And I just find that it's not realistic for people, especially high achievers, to move from a career to endless play and endless vacation. I find that we have to have mental stimulation, right? We have to have community. We have to have things that challenge us and really cycle between the work and play. Have you seen that with any retirees though? Do you know anyone who's retired that maybe just focused on the play or traveling and that's it?
Oh, yes, yes. I've seen many who have retired cold turkey, and many of them will say they don't know how they worked because they have so many things on their plate in retirement. And they came from all walks of life, professional, more blue collar, more some pink collar. But even among many of the professionals, they got to a point where they said, I'm retiring, and they went cold turkey and they're enjoying retirement. I know others who have retired for health reasons. So, that's a whole other category.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then I know some who've retired, but who have gone out and retired from professional jobs and who have gone out and gotten a part time job immediately, doing something so unrelated to their former field of endeavor just to keep themselves busy and enjoy the part time jobs.
What camp do you think you would fall in as you see some of these other people that have retired? What do you think your typical day in retirement will look like?
I would probably find another type of consulting work to do whereby it could truly be part time. And by part time, I mean 20 hours a week, no more than 25 hours a week, and ease into retirement that way. And it would probably be something in the medical arena, maybe medical writing, maybe with another client other than my current largest client who could orchestrate something and is less restrictive for me, or to me, doing the same kind of consulting that I do. Um, I would investigate options which would truly be part time consulting options as a transition into full retirement, and then possibly gradually decrease the amount of part time hours so that I wean myself off work. I think for me, at least at this point, it would have to be a weaning process
Why is that?
because I think cold turkey is not the ticket for me at this point.
That makes sense. And so over time, as you wean yourself off of work, you may pick up more gardening. Is that right? There's like an inverse
Yeah,
relationship.
I would, yes, I would start to really plan. Maybe it's a matter of moving to warmer climes where gardening could be done 12 months a year or 10 months a year versus, 8 months a year, like in the North, in the middle Atlantic. You know, while I was weaning, I would definitely have to put a retirement plan in place
Have you ever
because
been to
I have a
Dallas?
plan.
Have you ever made it down to Dallas, Cynthia?
I have been to Dallas on several occasions for business. And I hate to say this, it was usually in the winter
Oh
when I got
no.
stuck in ice storms sitting on the airport tarmac.
And our ice storms are nothing like Philly. But the reason why I ask is since you love gardening so much, for Christmas, my in-laws got my wife and I and our baby uh, a membership to the Arboretum, the Dallas Arboretum. It's one of the
Oh,
best in the country. So if you're ever here for business, you got to check it out. I think Martha Stewart said it's her favorite Arboretum in the
really?
country. Yeah, yeah. So I may be making that fact up, but
Well,
but
thanks for the tip. It sounds like a
yeah,
great arboretum, regardless of if it's indeed Martha's favorite or not.
yeah, and so I'm curious, what gives you purpose today? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, my largest client and my smaller clients get me out of bed because I have, you know, early morning meetings, and before I start my day, I have an exercise regimen that I want to get under my belt. So, knowing that I have a hectic morning schedule gets me out of bed. There's no time to fritter away time.
So let's say that you slowly wean off the amount of hours you're putting into work to the point where maybe you're exclusively focusing on your hobbies and other interests. What will give you purpose at that point?
I think, as I mentioned, part time work could possibly give me the same, it would give me the same kind of purpose. And then if it weren't part time work, it possibly going back to school.
Yeah.
Um, I am a member of a gardening organization called the Master Gardeners of my local community, and they have many volunteer pursuits, whether they be outreach to the community, hort therapy, a horticultural hotline where you answer consumers' questions. I would probably get involved more in doing volunteer work for the master gardeners. Community outreach would give me purpose also. That type of community outreach.
You know what really sticks out to me is it sounds like you are such a hard worker. You definitely fall in that high achiever category, but you've done such a good job along the way of exercising some of these other interests and hobbies that you have. It's not uncommon for some of the high achievers that I talk to have very limited hobbies. And I
Yeah.
think naturally, when you transition into retirement, this will help you because you'll find community in these different organizations that you're a part of, which I
Yes.
think is so important as we make this transition. I have one
And
last question.
I've already found community, and I would like to continue being part of those communities and deepening the involvement with them.
I think that's so important. I have one last question for you before you wrap up. And looking back on your career, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I think at different points in my career, I thought to myself, did I make the right career decision? You know, I told you I was interested in economics. Should I have gone? I'm a pharmacist by profession and also have an advanced degree. I thought, should I have gone? You know, I had some questions along the way. Should I have gotten into something other than the medical field? But over the years, I really feel like I've made a good decision for a variety of reasons, financially, and also from an enjoyment perspective. So I have no regrets.
I love it. That's how we should live life, right?
Yes,
Well,
yes.
Cynthia, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Same here, Nick.
Have a
Thank
great
you
rest of
for
your
your,
day.
you too. Thanks again.
Take care.